Welcome to IC3, where we talk about art, comics, and the industry. This week's guest is Mikail. Mikail, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
That's it. That's all the excitement we got. We got X-Men jersey on. Like, you're ready to go, aren't you?
I'm saving my words.
One of my favorite things that I liked as a kid was Wizard World, not Wizard World. It was just Wizard at the time. Wizard World established later, but the magazine. I always liked that section where they had the envelopes where people wrote in and drew on the envelopes, and I always liked to see where people were coming from and what they did, and it was a cool segment to where, like, if you had like a friend or if you sent an envelope, you always rushed to that issue to see if you were in that issue.
Sure, like sending a letter to a book.
Right. Yeah. Seeing if your letter was in the back of the book and stuff like that. That's cool. But the Wizard, I always like the art on the envelope. That always cracked me up. So I wanted to create a segment on this show where it wasn't randomly picking people, but it was like going through Instagram, going through Facebook, going through the different like social medias and see who's doodling and drawing and coming up with like really cool artwork that I'm like, oh my God, I got to share this with the world. And so that's the opening of the show. Is I want to focus on 3 pieces of artwork that I found throughout the week. And if you would like to submit artwork for us to like spotlight, just comment in YouTube with like your Instagram handle and I will check you out. And and then we'll go from there. And Mikhail and I will be like, hey, that's pretty amazing. But the first piece of artwork that I found is this Rocketeer piece from Christian Messi. He's a cartoonist from the Midwest. He earned his MFA from the Hartford Art School at the University of Hartford. And I'm a sucker for the Rocketeer, and I think this is beautiful.
I mean, look at the color theory, first of all. He's really dialed into making the separate elements come together and work together, but really pop out as well. And I think you're right. Rocketeer just brings out the creative juices of every artist who's working on it. And this is fantastic. It's so stylized. It's so unique.
Yeah, I definitely. It's one of those things where it's a new, unique version of the Rocketeer. Yet it has all the things that I love about the Rocketeer. And then, like, I want to see this book. I want to see this continue. Like, I want to know the girl's backstory. I want to know like why he's kind of like punk rockish, with the fingers. Like, I really just want to read the book now.
Yeah, you almost feel like this might even be a new Rocketeer, somebody new under the helmet that we don't know. And but getting back to the art, there's so many good choices that have been made here to make the figure work. Even though he's monotone, you get the shine on the helmet to kind of set that apart. And yeah, it's fantastic.
Do you have so for me, the Rocketeer is one of those characters where I see it, I just jump to it. What's a character that you like, if you see like out of the corner of your eye, you're gonna like track it down?
Oh, well, for me, it's Galactus usually. I like to see how different artists interpret him. There's so many ways, human scale, cosmic scale, everything in between.
Yeah, that's a very interesting character as well if you're drawing them, because it's like you can make like a little dash mark and that could be like the Silver Surfer because Galactus is so massive.
Yep. And as an art collector, the other character that really can be flexible is Death from the Sandman. In the books themselves, she's shown to appear in different forms depending on who's viewing her. So I think that immediately opens up a lot of possibilities.
And then just the stylistic feel of that, like when you say like Sandman, I'm like, oh man, I really want to see what Bill Sienkiewicz could do with that, because I feel like Sandman is one of those. It's one of those books where, or in group of characters that like you can really interpret the art and like blow the envelope open with style.
Yes, and you feel like the writer and the editorial just really went after artists that they admired to bring them onto this project. And so over the course of the run, you see great variety in how these characters are expressed.
All right, so let's move on to our next creator. that I found on the Instagram. This picture just jumped out at me because the more and more I hang out with artists, I really like to get into their head and see where they are in the world. And Jamie Jones is one of my friends, and he's also a cartoonist. And I like how he, as at a point in his time where I think he's exploring avenues of creation. But this is Mark Goodrich. He's an illustrator from Venice Beach, and he graduated from Cal Art. But this just really got to me on an emotional level of somebody just trying to explore their creativity like bandwidth.
It's very compelling. The lines are really clean. And do you know if he works digitally or traditionally?
So, from what I've discovered on my research, he hangs out at Starbucks and he works digitally, and then also he'll do some pencils. And I think the last thing he was working on was like he was like doing a lot of doing this like a ballpoint pen on Starbucks napkin. So it's like all over the place.
I mean, I feel like this has a slight digital feel to it, just from the shading on the guy's 5 o'clock shadow. But it also has this Love and Rockets vibe to it in terms of the way that the simplicity of the faces that still have so much expression.
Yeah, and
And
I think like for me, um, my base is kind of like Todd McFarlane, and I liked how like all of the outside characters or background characters of Spider-Man or Spawn were always kind of like exaggerated faces. So I think that's why I like this a lot. Is I feel like I'm coming from a place and I'm hitting like a new place of somebody exploring things.
right, I think that's always fun to see, right? Like, obviously, the artist here is exploring and trying to see what they can pull out of an expression or how they can portray something different. And they're not being very precious about it. They're just noodling a little bit. But the overall, it's just there's so much to see and appreciate. Different angles, different expressions, people doing different things with their mouths.
And I just like that I've kind of already established a story behind this since like his Instagram is he's always at Starbucks and he's like, "Oh, I did this at Starbucks today." And I love that kind of like cinema quality of like a story of this artist just hanging out at Starbucks, doodling, drawing. Some of his other Instagram stuff is more rough of where he's out there and stuff. This is a little bit more polished. I wanted to show that, but like, I'm like, which one of these characters was actually ordering a coffee and
Hmm.
is based on somebody in real life?
Who is talking the barista's ear off, and
Yeah.
who's scalding themselves on the hot coffee?
Oh. And this last piece I saw earlier in the week from Jesse Lonergan. He was a guest at IC3 for the first year, and I really like his artwork. I got a commission from him of Michelangelo, and it's amazing. But he called this his most complicated page he's ever worked on.
And that's saying something from someone who does what is it, like 30 panels on a page sometimes. I think Hedra was just that, right? It was a bunch of many panels on a page depicting an image. But you can see why he would say that, and the use of the different colors, the two colors really helps push that three dimensionality and to explore what he was going for. Was this from Man's Best?
I reached out to him to see if he was working on something new or if this was something a commission or something. It was like because he called it like Panda Delivery Service.
Yeah, you can see it's pretty interesting once you dig into it. But he's
But
a phenomenal artist, a really unique voice for sure. It's really fun to see someone like him pushing the envelope.
yeah, and I wanted to show the pencils first. I He's still inking right now. He's currently inking, and if you go to his Instagram or his Facebook, he has segments where he's inking, and that was a really cool debate in the comments thread because like there was a lot of artists that follow him, and he was like, "I'm afraid to ink this thing," and everybody was like, "Oh." how are you going to ink it? Are you going to like scan this and then like digitally, or you're going to scan this and then digitally ink it? Or are you going to like ink over your pencils? Like, how does it work, the process? And there was like a really cool like process debate going on below this page, which even made it more entertaining. And I'll provide links to this to his Facebook so that you can explore what he's working on and you actually see the final product of this page. I don't think it's done yet because I think he's going like hour by hour of like this is what I've done in an hour, and since it's super complicated, he's not getting very far in an hour.
I always there's two things that I admire about artists. One is exactly that you get the layout down, something tricky like this, and you've sort of figured it out, and then you got it. It's a leap of faith to just start inking it, and I think a majority of artists will just ink directly over their pencils. And the other thing is then to be able to let go of that art. You know, you work hard, you create a page, you're really proud of it, expresses your image, and then a lot of artists will just sell that and wrap up the project and move on to the next project. And I know from experience, my 9-year-old daughter hates letting go of any of her good artwork. She wants to hang on to it.
Yeah, this is I'm always going to talk about the story behind things. I'm apparently saying this a lot, but I like that Jesse gave us a glimpse into his world of creating for just like a little bit. He doesn't share every page that he's working on, but it's like, this is a special page, and I'm going to take you through the process of this is what I've established. These are some of the complications or conflicts that I'm working on, and this is where I'm going to end up on. And I'm very excited to see the inked version and then the colored version, and then when it's in print, like those 4 different stages are going to be very beautiful.
Absolutely. It's particularly as you mentioned the inked version, where then presumably it's going from 2 colors down to 1 color. How will that express itself? I'm really quite keen to see how that works out.
Are you ready to talk about some comic books?
Yes, but I was going to throw a kink into the works here. As we started out with sketches on letters, I had a quick show and tell, if you think people would be interested, that kind of pertains to that. And I just have it right here, amazingly. So I got a package from an artist, and they doodled this onto the exterior of the package. And you can see it's a dinosaur and a little Wolverine there hiding behind a cactus. And I found it particularly interesting because I'll show you the piece that was inside the package.
Oh man, that is insane.
And I just thought it was such a great sense of humor that this guy had to do the little doodle that shows this pixelated pre-moment, and then you have the main piece inside. It really tickled my funny bone.
Who's the artist?
He's an artist that I was not familiar with. He works out of Brazil. His name is Celso Mazin.
And how did you find him then? Like
so
process now?
The sister show on Comic Art Fans, every Thursday they have a weekly update, and usually Chris Norick runs through all the artwork that's added to the site in a week and picks 10 pieces, and Bill picks 10 pieces to talk about, just that are interesting or new. And I was filling in one week for Chris, and I found a piece by this artist. I thought it was really fascinating. There wasn't a lot of his work on the website. So after I picked his piece to feature, having a problem myself, I then reached out to him to arrange a commission for myself. And then, what I like to do is I follow them on Instagram. When I post the piece to my Comic Art Fans site, I'll provide a link for other people to go and check out his work.
That's amazing.
It's a great community, and this is what we saw at IC3 too. I think is the support amongst the artists was just fantastic for each other.
Lost Fantasy #1 comes out from Image Comics on April 30th. It is written by Curt Pires with art by Luca Casalanguida, and Mark Dale is the color art. This is interesting. They labeled it as color art and letter art. It's usually colorist and letter. But Mark Dale is color art and Micah Myers is letter art. And so that's my first question for you, Mikhail. How do you feel about that title, color art and letter art?
I think it's about time, to be honest. There are letterers doing really unique and interesting things. They are thinking about how can we stretch the medium, how can we convey more with a just a word balloon. And um, to go back to Sandman, for example, we saw a great example of Todd Klein really trying different techniques to give different characters a unique voice. And you can't talk about lettering without talking about Todd Klein in general. Any amazing piece of work in comics, he's pretty much been there, done that. And there's a whole new generation coming up too. And what we also notice, or at least what I've been noticing, is there's a slight difference because we've moved from lettering directly onto the page to the lettering generally being a digital edition after the fact, which has its pros and cons. When you see the finished art, it's more clean. You don't have the word balloons on it, but then also you don't have the word balloons on it. And the story is an integral part of sequential art. It's the writer and the artist working together. But I think lettering artist, color artist are great titles. There's a lot of colorists doing a lot of heavy lifting too, especially in the digital realm. I'll see notes on black and white art asking the colorist to create a gradient or add clouds to a sky, that kind of thing, which can really be done very effectively digitally.
And let's talk about Lost Fantasy. This cover right here, if we're talking about colors, we're talking about font, letters, like this book right here makes me want to buy it purely on the yellow and the pink and the bold font used for Lost Fantasy.
That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's standing out on a shelf. That's the big battle that's going on. That's where these variant covers seem to have come from. And now, those have taken on a life of their own in terms of rarity and value and that aspect of it. But when I walk into an LCS, 100%, it does not hurt to have a cover that's going to reach out and grab you. And it's a good contrast too, because there's a big gray, stonish creature, which is hard to do and make attractive. But the red eyes, you've got the green. But I think the choice to make that header so bright and vibrant worked out really well.
Yeah, this cover works really, really well to like drown out the noise of the rest of the comic book shop. If I saw this on the wall, I would be drawn to it like immediately, whether it's the yellow or the pink or the giant monster on the forefront. Like it has three solid elements to it to where I'm just like, okay, I need to see more of it. And I have some like bullet points. That's usually what I do in like a review of comic book. And I was like, the beginning and end were very solid for me. I think the opening segment works really well. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on. And then the way the book ends, it's kind of a cliffhanger to making me want to read the second issue. What's your reaction to the first issue?
I enjoyed the art. It brought to mind artists that I really enjoy, like Sean Phillips, a little bit of Chris Samnee. The artist who I'm not familiar with has really considered a lot about what they're doing, how they're moving the eye around. And like you, I thought the ending was very nice, a nice surprise, something out of the ordinary. You definitely at least want to know how that resolves or what the reasoning is, because that character is narrating, so there's more to the story coming up. And then in the middle, I think they're packing in a lot of information. And I would want to see how that goes. How are they developing these different ideas? And personally, what I really look for nowadays is for a book to not fall into a trope or a pattern that I've seen before.
Yeah, that's tough. That is really tough. And I'm on the fence about, because there are a few tropes in the book with like the sheriff and what they were talking about dialogue wise. Like I feel like the dialogue is timely. It's a little political. Um, but I know the writer Kurt, that's where he tries to stay on the edge. You know, he likes to push some buttons here and there, and he likes to explore, you know, how the world is acting currently. So the political elements and the I guess exaggerated political dialogue that was going on in it, and is it really exaggerated? Who knows? That's a whole nother story. But I liked that it was in there, but I'm also like on the fence because again, as a reader, you're like, oh man, I wanted to like get out of get out of this political mode for a second and just enjoy the comic book. But that's the world we live in, and I do like that comic books reflect society. Like that's I go nuts when I like get to look at that stuff, you know, 10 years later. Like, oh, that's what they were trying to do. But in the moment, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's a catch 22 kind of thing. But it's one of those things where again, I'm going to say I'm going to need the second issue to see how the characters react in the world or interact with the world that Kurt has created. But I'm excited.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think that he did strike a good balance because that political discourse is there, but it's well balanced because obviously there are fantastical elements involved throughout the entire thing. So it brings you there, it has you thinking about it for a moment, but then we are also able to move on and explore the other worlds that he's building and putting into this. So, but I totally get your point, and I think that's what's nice about established comics is if you don't want that, you know where to go to safely not get the exposure to what the real world is like. But what's super interesting is in 20 years when we look back on a book, what is it telling us about our time? What is it telling us about what was happening at that moment? And how and it's we've seen that it's possible to keep a story valid even after a particular era has passed. Or if in the case of Watchmen, it seems very present and just history repeating itself over and over again.
All right. This is a very specific aspect of the book, and I want to know how you felt about it because this is another thing that either goes one way or the other way for me. In the book, there's a sheriff, and the sheriff looks like Sam Elliott. And I'm not
100%.
sure how I feel about that because then it takes me out of the book for a second. And then I also add Sam Elliott's voice to that character. And so I'm not sure. And again, it's a one-off character where he might not be in the issue or be in future issues. Like that might just be the one-off that we meet him and it moves on. But I'm still now after the book is done, I'm thinking about Sam Elliott being in the book. So how do you feel about Sam Elliott being in the book?
I would tend to agree that it probably would have been better served without that because, like you say, it immediately brings to mind Sam Elliott's voice. And Sam Elliott is also quite outspoken politically. He has a point of view that he's not shy to share. So that puts you on one side of the sheriff, who's trying to talk to us about the other side in a sense. There was another odd homage that I caught, which is I don't know how common a name Tyrion is. I think for most of us, it comes from Game of Thrones now. I don't know if it existed as a name before that property, but there's a Tyrion in this book. So I thought that, so for me, that worked as a nice nod, an homage just from someone saying, hey, I appreciated this property. Let's put this little Easter egg into the book. What you pointed out about Sam Elliott's likeness, I think is a step too far, personally. And also, if we talk about Game of Thrones, I recall at the time when they were shooting it, it was so popular. They had many Hollywood actors asking to be in it in some capacity or the other. And they always refrained from the sensational cameo or what have you because they wanted to keep you in that world of Game of Thrones without pulling you out with a famous face or a famous name popping up. And I think that holds true even here.
Yeah, no, the more I think about it, and the more I think about it, the more I don't want to think about it. So I think I'm anti Sam Elliott because again, it's like I start bringing in all this baggage. You know, we just came out of this election cycle, and I know that like I know where Sam Elliott stands politically because he came out and talked about it. That then, you know, have this character have a different personality. I'm like, again, it just I think it opens up a wormhole of baggage from the reader and where it seems like a good idea like oh man I really like Sam Elliott and he is an inspirational figure and or however you are with Sam Elliott like having him in there like I could see him being cast as the sheriff it makes sense but then again like it just takes me out of the book and I would
Absolutely.
recommend against it.
You could have had a cameo of us, maybe they're in the sheriff's office and there's one panel with Sam Elliott as another character just in the background doing something else. That serves your purpose of a nod if that's what you want to do. But
Right.
to
And
have
this
the
is where
main
we're kind of
character,
like putting words in the creator's mouths, and I try to stay away from that. But you
yeah,
did mention the
absolutely.
word panel. What is your opinion on borderless panels versus bordered panels?
I don't think I think about it unless it's bringing me out of the book, like Sam Elliott.
Okay.
So if I'm seeing an image and my eye is moving across it as sequential art is supposed to do, I if I don't notice it, that's the ideal. And sometimes you notice a clever little panel break, something to draw the eye. That's great too. I don't think it's something I really think about in the grand scheme of things, though. I know people have very specific ideas about it. What about you?
For me, I feel like if it's a borderless panel, like when the background is white, it just makes me think that it's more of a digital book or it's you know, it just it takes me out a little bit of it. Because I part of me wants to feel that somebody drew this by hand, and and the the handmade feel slash versus the digital feel versus I would even put like watercolors. Like I mean, I have a Jeff Lemire page sitting in my desk right here, and I it's there's just a different feel to it, and I almost feel like it's you know tactile feel in my head and in my crazy brain when I talk about comic books.
It's a hot topic in the tattoo community too, whether you should outline your pieces or not.
Oh,
And I think
really?
the general rule of thumb ends up being develop your craft with outlines until you get to the point where your voice can be expressed without them in a very masterful, calculated way.
Yeah, you mentioned like the thinking. If I notice it, it's probably not good. But I think that's the thing is the why on creating. Like, why are you giving this borderless panels? Like, do you feel like you're communicating the story differently? Are you, you know, are you bringing in different emotions? Are you trying to like without the borders, the things kind of like break apart kind of thing. Like, what emotions are you trying to invoke? The same thing. Like, I feel like there are people that are very talented at you know making films or making art or you know comic books and everything, but they don't understand why they're doing certain things. And so I think that's my thing on the borderless panels.
I agree. I think when it's done well, I can think of a few examples offhand. It's to give you a sense of vastness and space. It's a nice trick in that regards. But 90% of what we see, or at least what I'm seeing, is with panels, with borders. So it's still not the norm.
All right, so let's break down some panels here because I really think the first two pages do a really good job of storytelling and they set up I don't know if they set up the stakes, but they ratchet the emotional experience of reading the comic book. And with the first page, I like the giant first establishing shot panel, and then cinematically, I like these like close-ups where you get the eyes, you get the shadows, and then they establish, that she's covered in blood. And then the one thing that really I think is going to get overlooked is that the girl is running forward. She's running forward in panel 2, and she's running forward, but she kind of gives a look back, and then in panel 4 she runs into somebody. So your brain, or my crazy brain, kind of looks back and then looks forward, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm surprised. There's a giant dude there." And it works really well for me.
Particularly as the new characters in the shadows, all in black. There's not a lot of detail, so you're experiencing them almost like she might be, quickly on the run in a panic, and you haven't had a chance to focus or anything yet. So you just see some person.
And
And I do like that it's all horizontal panels too.
yeah, I think there's definitely like if you think about it video game wise, the old school video games went like from left to right across the page or across the screen, and you just kept going that way. And I think that's kind of like what works really well for this is the cinematic angle of it, and then you've seen this before in a film, so you can hear her footsteps, you can hear the rustling of the leaves, and you can hear her panting. Like I can hear her panting. Like,
Absolutely.
do you hear these elements too when you're reading comic book?
I do, and I think the artists have really done a good job with creating that atmosphere that's instantly relatable from whether your own experience or from TV and film, of where exactly they've placed this character very exactly in a particular situation, and I think it's very effective.
And I just thought about this now, is the cover, has the monster in the woods, the green, and the guy with the sword, but like it's the same setting that the first page starts with. So it's
In the
almost like a
forest.
continuation of the cover.
And that's funny. It's something I never think about. So the cover did its job. I purchased the book. And then when I start to read it, I generally don't even remember what the cover is. So that's interesting that you have that kind of an opposite reaction to that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm from like a community. My degree is in communication, like how people communicate with other people, but I also have been working in like marketing and PR, and I think psychologically about how things kind of work. You open up the page, and because how many times have you had like an amazing cover of a comic book, and then you open it up and the artwork does not match the artwork on the cover, and you're like, oh man, what just happened here? But this is I
That
have
that's certainly that's a different experience for sure.
right. So I have to give credit where like the artwork matches the interior, but it's literally the same forest that the girl is in. Because this setting changes throughout the book, but like you get it and then you hop into the book and you're immediately off and running. Like there's a lot of different elements of like storytelling elements where, like Gail Simone's like, don't have a boring comic book. You have an infinite budget, like special effects budget, like go crazy. And the book literally starts off with her running and you're like, oh my God, what is going on? So this book gets me excited from the jump.
And I think as we dig in a little bit deeper, I perhaps read things more superficially in terms of I generally won't make a judgment on one page. I'll generally read the sequence. And then when a particular sequence ends, maybe that's where my brain stops to take a beat and then analyze, how do I feel about this? How did this work?
All right, well, let's go to page 2 then, because now she's not running. In the end of the first page, she meets a stranger, and you're like, oh, this is the bad guy. What works well for me on this is like my eye is really moving throughout the page. It almost makes like a question mark or reverse S kind of motion with my eyes. But the things that kind of stand out to me is that like I like look at the girl first as she's looking up at the gentleman, and I feel like that's really interesting. And then um, the panel where the gentleman doesn't make it, he doesn't live any longer. I'm trying to figure out like if this page would have the same movement if his glasses weren't flying through the air. And I think this page works really well for me.
It like I said earlier, I feel the artist really has put a lot into each decision about how they've crafted this. I love your point about the glasses, also because in addition to this gentleman presumably dying, it immediately humanizes him because we see him in that first panel, dark with the glasses. We assume that he's the bad guy. But then when they fly off, it's the only time we even see something of his eyes, and it makes him so much more human immediately in his last moments. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and
And
then the girl, her clothes are very not very detailed, and then his overalls are very detailed, and it's almost like the camera's getting in focus on him, where like she's still kind of a blur. We don't know what's going on and running through everything, but then like we just for a hot second get really focal on him. And I'm not saying it's going to make me care about him, but it almost does, where I'm like, oh, this is a person. And then this person's
he,
dead. I don't,
he put on a hoodie and then he put on his overalls and was doing something in the woods.
man, but
What I found interesting about this and thinking about how my brain works is when he says, "Whose blood is that?" That's the first time I didn't notice the blood on her in that first page, on that first page, which just goes to show what I was saying, that I'll read it and kind of almost do a skim. And then I read that paragraph, the sentence about the blood, and then I went back and said, oh yeah, she is covered in blood already. Which is the fun thing about comics, right? You can take that beat, go back if you want, and then continue on. But what do you think about the color swap in that fourth panel?
oh yeah, no, it stands out, the yellow, the red, the orange in the back, like, and then the hand on the layout of that panel, I think is really good. And because I don't know what just killed him. And that's my brain after reading the book and seeing, a couple different monsters in there. Spoiler alert, the book is about monsters. They established that really quickly. Um, but, and I'm assuming that this is a monster, but we don't know, like, I can't figure out what kind of monster that is or is doing that. And all my brain is trying to do is figuring it out. But if we break down the panel, like you have the action words in the background, you have the guy's head, and his body, which is kind of like in color and kind of in focus, and then you have his glasses, and then you have the big bloody slash through it. But then his like bottom part of his body and his arms are silhouette, and something really works on this, and I'm not sure why.
In fact, if you try and reconstruct his body without the slash, you get the sense that that hand is a little bit too far away, so it's been severed almost completely and is falling away from him in a different direction from his head and torso. So it's pretty brutal and effective.
Yeah, no, and little background on me is I have a huge imagination, and everything in the world scares me. So I can fill in the gaps. My brain, like I said, I mentioned that like I can hear her panting, and I can hear the footsteps, I can hear the rustle, and then like I don't know what sound I'd make for this, but like my brain is trying to figure out. Like my brain is going through the Rolodex of monsters I have in my head, being like, what just did that? And it's I get a little goosebumps on that kind of stuff when I like, because I have like right behind me is a closet to my basement, and I even though it's full of comic books and everything I love is in there, I'm still afraid of that when the lights go off. It's just who I am. I'm a scaredy cat.
Well, and you know it's not a single blade. This
Yeah.
is a hand with claws.
No, this is very exciting. Very exciting. All right.
And I guess he's giving the girl a moment to get away and start running.
Yeah, and that's where my brain goes super crazy because I'm like, well, if she's not getting attacked right away, like, is that guy like getting eaten? What's going on?
Oh, I like that.
You
Yes,
know, like
because
is it?
otherwise the monster would be presumably right on top of her.
Yeah, it's one of those. It's yeah. I just go down a rabbit hole of these things when I start thinking about them, and then I wonder why my kids have crazy imaginations too. And so don't hand down if you have a crazy imagination, don't hand it down to your kid.
I think we did also consider that if the monster was chasing the little girl, did it reach over her to eviscerate this gentleman? Did it come around the side?
In my head, I feel like it came jumping down through a tree, like and diagonal across the panel.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So, but from the tidbits that they give you in you know, uh, the about section of the book, like I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but there are monsters, and I'm excited to see what this monster is. All right, let's close this one out. This is the big question. Did Lost Fantasy #1 hook you enough to buy the second issue?
I would say yes, just because that last panel is very powerful. I really do want to know what happens to that character and how, if they're able to continue on. And then a lot of it would rest on how complicated are you making this world? And if I don't understand the bones of it by the end of the second issue, I would start to question if I'm going to continue. But I think that they would get another issue out of me.
Yeah, there's enough interesting factors going on in the book, and then also the fact that there's like a pretty wicked cliffhanger. I'm a completist when it comes to that stuff, where I need to know what's going on. So I'm definitely going to read the second issue, but that's where I need them to establish like the overall universe or quest. Like, is this a murder mystery and it's going to be like a detective episode, or is it this like, you mentioned Game of Thrones? Is it this like Game of Thrones universe where it's just all these different moving parts and people being evil to each other, and it's like a giant chessboard of emotions and stuff. And I don't know if I'm in for that. I part of me wants it just to be not a mellow. Part of me just wants it to be like this murder mystery, a kind of monster of the week tale that like each 5 issues is like, oh, now we got to move on to the next monster mystery kind of thing. But I don't know, where do you want to go?
I wanted to go someplace interesting.
Right.
I want something that I wasn't expecting. And it's interesting nowadays with so many offerings available. How do you choose what to take a chance on? I see creators bolstering each other up, helping to plug their friends' projects, etc. Sometimes we look at a particular publishing house that I like what a publisher does, and I like the way their editorial team seems to think. So I'll give, all of their titles a shot. It's People have to really there's so much available that you can't read everything. You can't afford to buy everything and then store it and stock it. So I think you need a good recommendation from a friend who you trust, whose tastes are similar to yours. It's a tough one. I used to really take a lot of chances, and then you end up with a lot of issue 1 and 2s floating around that drive my completist mind crazy. But I like when a project gains a passionate following. If you were to take Something is Killing the Children, for example, it's not quite my genre, but I did read the first 2 arcs, I think in trade eventually. But I just love how much people resonate with those characters, and then it brings out fan art, it brings out people wanting to put them in different, situations, and then the writer himself really keeping the audience's attention. And that's a really hard tightrope to walk.
Well, this is why also I've stopped reviewing issue, let's call it like 479 of Amazing Spider-Man, and I only review first issue books because there is so much noise in the world, and there's a lot of discourse about, Batman, Superman, big 2 books, and all the canon and all the baggage that comes along with that, where there aren't a lot of people being like, hey, I just read this #1 issue. You might want to check it out. And this probably leads into why I host a show called Indie Comics Creator Con. But if you're going to buy Spider-Man, like, you're going to buy Spider-Man. You don't need me to tell you like, oh, this is a good issue. And then you're like, oh, I'm a new Spider-Man reader and I'm going to hop on and read that now because Matt said I should read it. Like, I don't think that happens anymore. Like, you like Spider-Man, you start reading Spider-Man. You don't need a reviewer to say that. But you do need a reviewer to say, hey, I think Lost Fantasy is worth a shot. I'm definitely in it for the first 2 issues. Like, that's what the world needs from reviewers, is to kind of look at the first issues and stuff. And this is one of my little soapbox for anybody else that reviews comic books out on YouTube and the rest of the world. Like, stop reviewing Batman. Like, stop reviewing. I'm trying to think of the other one. Stop reviewing, a Tom King book. Like, whatever Tom King's working on in DC right now. Like, we already know that Tom King writes a good book. Like, we don't need to review that. Like, start reviewing indie books. That's my little soapbox right there. Start reviewing #1 books, even if it's like a new series of a smaller big 2 publisher. But that's my soapbox. We're gonna leave it, and now we're gonna go into the interview with Mikail that I'm really excited for, because we're gonna talk more comic books. Hi, Mikail. I want to get to the nitty gritty of your comics experience, and I want to get to know you as a person, and I want to like really understand your comic personality. So what is the first comic book you read?
I don't think I could put a finger exactly on it, but the issue that I recall very clearly is Action 583. It's an Alan Moore story, Whatever Happened to the Man of Tomorrow. And it was a 2-part story, but it really worked quite well as a standalone. And I think that's the crux of it, that you're going to remember a standalone story that you read and enjoyed and that had an ending. There was no cliffhanger. There was nothing else. It was done. And I think as a young child, I grew up abroad, so I didn't have access to a comic book store. That was very important, that I had some closure. And, they say that Alan Moore can write a good story. And I think that's important. Everything that I resonate towards nostalgia-wise, it's a marriage of the art and the story. And that's what pure comics is. So I love that about the medium.
And how old were you when you read that book?
I was 9. I was 9, probably. Yeah. My parents moved us from California to Pakistan, and it was quite a culture shock for me. But luckily, I found an old briefcase full of various assorted comics in the basement, in the attic of my grandmother's house. And I read those to pieces, to the extent where my mother got fed up and then eventually just donated them to a local library. And it was a wild mix of different titles, mostly Big 2. And when you were in a pre-internet era, not to date myself, there's only so much entertainment to be had. And so you read comics and then you reread them and you reread them again. And you, at that impressionable age, you just absorb everything like a sponge. And it really was fundamental to shaping my appreciation of comics today.
Is there a comic book that made you think that comic books could be more than just like big two stuff, or more than just superhero adventure tales?
Yeah, it's the usual answers, Watchmen, and later on Kingdom Come, definitely, I think, had a big impact. Killing Joke was really a revelation. Again, nice standalone story. I just really respond to a solid story that is out of the ordinary. All-Star Superman, I remember they did such a good job of taking a very powerful character and giving them human depth, human foibles, fallacies, weaknesses. And yet there was a fantastical element to the story. And that, again, comics are perfect for that. Before there was CGI, before there were special effects, this was the way to do it. And your mind picked up and filled in all the details. And I really was able to get lost in those stories. And I think I came out of them thinking about the medium and the world differently. And that's a job well done in my book.
All right, let's peel the onion back one more level. How do you feel when you read a comic book?
How do I feel when I read a comic book? I feel so when you take there's two ways I approach it, I think. You have your big two, your familiar characters. And honestly, for myself, nowadays, a lot of the stories I read feel very basic. They don't engage me. But when you take what a familiar character, what the strength is that you can take someone with a rich back history, and then if you can put them into a new environment, in a new situation that is well written, that's really engaging. That I haven't seen this done before with this particular character. And that gives the writer there's restrictions because the character has a personality, but there's also richness that comes with that. We all know Peter Parker in a particular way, and Peter Parker brings a certain morality and indecision and thoughtfulness to his experiences. And so if a writer captures that and gives us something new, that's fantastic. If a writer gives me a Peter Parker that does not mesh with at least my Peter Parker, it immediately takes me out of it and makes me unhappy. That's one side of it. And then the other side is on what you would call indie comics, where someone takes something new and spins it into a universe that I find very interesting. An example of that is, Jesse, we talked about Jesse Lonergan. He did that book, Hedra. It's a silent book, but very thought-provoking. Or on the other end of the spectrum, a lot wordier is The Department of Truth, which kind of tickles my X-Files funny bone a little bit. And it's well written, and you have a nice conspiracy running through it. So I want to feel something new. I don't like plot holes. So if I can immediately isolate a plot hole, it takes me out of it, like seeing Sam Elliott does.
Okay, my final question. Why do you think there's this eternal perception that the comic book industry is always dying?
Well, I think I'm not an expert on this aspect of it, but I believe if you look at sales figures for individual books, they are nowhere near what we used to see, I think, in the heyday boom of the 90s. So maybe that's something that people look at and comment on. I've never understood it, to be honest. I see more inclusion in comic book stores. I see a different variety of people. The trope of comic book guy, I don't think is as prevalent as it may have been at one point. I hear so many stories of true gatekeeping at comic book stores at a certain point in time. I hope that that's not the way things are. That's certainly not what I see at my comic book store. Maybe this is an interesting topic in terms of comic books when we talk about conventions. I think a lot of people who are comic book fans aren't appreciating the amount of detritus and side product that's a part of that experience now. The toys with bobbleheads, etc. I think you can take an example of at the Artist Alley in San Diego Comic Con, I believe, used to be much larger, and then a huge chunk of it was taken away from the artists to give to merchandise. So how is that promoting and celebrating the comic books themselves? So that might be something that people talk about. I see a great variety of stories. I see many more avenues for people to self-publish or publish with an indie publisher. The trick of it definitely is getting your work out there and getting people to see it. But I don't know why people really double down on this concept that comic books are dying. We saw, who would, if we had told you 20 years ago, oh, there's going to be a 10-year Marvel Cinematic Universe arc that was really well handled. I'm a big fan of MCU Phase 1. And just to see those final two movies, the emotions they were able to draw out, to see all your favorite characters on the screen. It was that was a golden era. I never would have thought to see that expressed in that way. And to see the large scale acceptance of that. Now you're starting to see comic books, props, etc., being displayed in a museum-like fashion. So, and is this an American point of view? When we look at places like Japan, where manga is very widely read, it's acceptable to read it. There's no judgment if you're a salaryman on the train reading a manga. In France or in Europe, where the sequential arts are celebrated as one of the fifth great art style, we're seeing great exhibits at museums collecting this kind of work. I don't think that those people would say that comics is a dying industry.
No, this is again another one of my soapbox. I think that we are in like a golden age of creation of comic books with the amount of indie creators, the amount of like DIY people that are making mini comic books, and you have like a Fife who can make a living off of Etsy and selling his book off of Etsy and having a big following, having a big Patreon followership as well. So you have people that are like established at Marvel and DC, but now you're seeing this whole another group of creators on the indie scene that are doing really well. And there's no longer a huge barrier of entry. Like, I have a friend who's a high school teacher, and his final project is the kids get to make a comic book and print it out. If back in my day, in early '90s, if the teacher did that for me, my life would have changed. I would have completely exploded and been like, "Mom and Dad, I just made a comic book. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do that. Like, here we go, boom, there." Like now, you can have a whole comic book series on Instagram and be successful that way. So the medium of comic books, I think, is in like I said, a golden age of like creation going on right now. Are people able to financially support themselves making comic books? That's a whole nother debate. But that, just like any other industry, you have people going out to California or used to go back to Hollywood with dreams of being a superstar, and then they fail. Like, it's just, that's part of life, is that cycle of failure, and people that make it, and then the people that grind it out and all those things. That's just kind of how life works. but I'm excited about the comic book industry. I'm excited um, for people creating books. I'm excited to see how the different distribution models start changing and evolving. Like technology is going crazy. Like there's a lot of moving parts, but I think somebody's going to disrupt it in a certain way, and things are going to change. And on the and again, I'm focusing kind of on the American side, but something's going to change. I don't know who's going to make it happen. And I think the distribution model is going to change to where it works at comic book shop levels and for creator levels. But that's my hopeful optimism. We'll see where it
So
goes.
let me ask you, I heard from people back in the day that attendees would be at San Diego Comic Con, and The Walking Dead was a big supporter, and I think the badges for many years were Walking Dead themed. And I heard a story about someone finally asking a friend, "Hey, why is The Walking Dead such a big part of this?" And it comes from not knowing that blockbuster TV series and the spin-offs come from a comic book. And I also don't feel that people who, even once they find that out, would go back and read the books. They accept the show for itself and aren't particularly interested in going back to read the source material. Do you ever have an experience about that, or feel like
Well,
it doesn't have the same cachet?
when I had a comic book store, I actually I knew what was going on, and I created a commercial that would air during the first episode of The Walking Dead, like on regular television. And so as a business person, I knew that was an opportunity to recruit new readers. Um, so your question is a retail question to where like comic book store owners need to work hard. And again, if you own a comic book store, you're a saint, you're an amazing person, and you do God's work, whatever God you believe in. But as a comic book store owner, you have to work your ass off to bring new readers into your shop. They're just not going to walk through your shop. But you have to be creative, have events, and bring in new readers, whether it's young, old, indifferent, whatever. And then when those people come through your door, you have to tell them, be like, hey, I know you've never read a comic book before, but I have a comic book for you in my shop. Because comic books is a spectrum. And whatever you're into, whether it's superheroes or slice of life or Stuff of Legend, which is one of my favorite books, is, kind of like a PG-13 Toy Story where where the toys come alive and they have to go fight the darkness. Um, like you as a retailer, you have to be really good at selling comic books, and you have to be able to like figure out like, is this person a floppy person, or is this a trade person, or how they, what motivates them to buy a book. And you got to find that. And it's again, it's not easy, it's hard, and owning a business is really hard. But like, if you want to be successful at it, and the stores that I've seen that have lasted, evolve and really hustle and are really good at selling.
I'm really glad you said that, because I was going to ask about it when we were discussing Lost Fantasy. How important is it that the publisher commit to at least the first arc of a book? And when you talk about recommending a title to someone, for me, a trade is always even though the price point is higher, that it's more attractive than just an issue, especially if it's a recommendation, because then I'm getting a more developed taste of the product than just one issue is going to give me. Do you ever think about that, or wonder?
I was thinking about this with Lost Fantasy because it said new ongoing series, and that left me very vague. Like, what does that mean? Because there are other books that you can compare it to. I don't know what issue Saga is on right now, but like I know that what indie book have you read outside of Walking Dead or like Savage Dragon or Spawn or something established that's made it past 50 issues? Not many. Not many have made it past 50 issues. And I'm sure everybody's going to start shouting out in the comments of like all of these
Invincible.
books, like all these books that have, but we're basically saying Kirkman, like if it's, Kirkman's got that cachet of being like, oh, I can run things
He's
out.
got the touch.
Yeah. So when they say ongoing series, I'm a little apprehensive because I don't know how long I'm in this for. I don't know what the game, how long, what's going to happen to where like, if they said like, and this could be the evolution of of the next evolution of how we buy and in the comic book series, where if they said this was a 6-issue miniseries and it was like part one of like a story arc, I'm like, oh, here's the first story. I can test it out. And then I know that the creator has more coming out. And then I don't know how you brand that or how you work that out, but like I would be more committed if I knew the book was only 6 issues, the series. And since I know it's ongoing, I'm a little apprehensive to where like they really need to world build and like really hook me to make me want to buy this book indefinitely.
Yeah,
Does that make
that's an interesting take on it. 100%. I hadn't even thought about that. Um, it I do think about it after the fact sometimes when you read a 12 issue maxi series and you're like, that could have been 10. They didn't need, there was 2 issues worth of stuff that they could have cut out. We also sometimes see now the publisher being a little bit flexible as a property is being written or developed. I believe there was a Swamp Thing run with Rom V and Mike Perkins that got an extension, and it was supposed to be 12 and it ended up being 16. And I just read Hellblazer Dead in America, and that was 11 issues to wrap the story. And I think they'd gotten 8 and then lobbied for 3 more. And you know what? I read it as a collection. It was great. So there is an interesting space there to consider. But when you talk about an LCS owner who's hosting a Pokemon tournament or a Magic tournament and then trying to, you know, promote some books, I think a trade's a really, for me personally, a powerful tool that I get into it, I read it, and then if they've got me for 6, chances are I'm going to come back and get the rest or wait for the rest.
Yeah, no, this is a very interesting conversation that I don't think is really going to wrap up anytime soon because there's so many different things coming out and things are changing and like how we buy, how we consume content. It's the most recent MCU film. This was like one of the first ones that I didn't see in the theater because I wasn't able to go opening weekend. And I'm like, oh, I'll just wait for it to come out. And then I didn't get to go the second weekend. I'm like, oh, I might be getting close to when it gets released digitally. I'm like, okay. But I still haven't got that release date. And I'm still like, oh, should I go to the movies to go see it? And like, I want to, but like, it's still, again, how we consume. Like, I enjoyed going to the movies back in the day, but now like going to a theater is a different experience now. And like, how does those different parallels apply to the comic book industry of how we buy, how we consume,
How
Netflix?
we let reviews
You're right.
sway us as well. Famously, I remember The Matrix was panned by critics, and but I think at that time the internet wasn't as fully developed, so you didn't get bombarded with opinions. So you made your own decisions about movies that you went to see, and I remember walking into the theater and just being blown away and loving every minute of it. And if now if I read a bunch of or was just exposed to a never-ending stream of subpar reviews about something, it does eventually get into your head and make you less likely to go to the theater.
Okay, I'm going to stop you right there because that is a topic for another show. Because I'm going to
You
talk to
wanted
you
to
about,
get to know me as a collector,
I
and
do, I do,
I
I do.
never give you any endpoints, and I never stop.
No, that's awesome because no, there's the comic review website, the aggregate website, and they basically do what Rotten Tomatoes does for comic books, and that is a debate topic that I want to talk to you about in the future. And so this is a perfect point to thank you for your time, because this conversation has been amazing. And I love talking about comic books, and I could do it forever. But like the podcast format, we can't go on forever. This is YouTube. They like the short stuff. But Mikail, thank you so much for your time, man.
Thank you for having me on. That was a blast. I think I learned a little bit about myself as well, and I appreciate it.
All right, well, we'll call this Comic Therapy now. That's what we're changing the title. It's Comic Therapy. Come to us every Tuesday, and we'll see who else we can fix. But
my wife will be much happier about me attending then.
All right, Mikail, take care, and I will see you in a month.
Sounds good, Matt. Be well.